This is also a time of change for my family.
A single sealed confirmation inside Buckingham corridors has just changed the balance of royal power forever. King Charles has officially confirmed Prince William as the sole authority over Sandringham, stripping shared influence from surrounding household structures and sending Camilla's inner team into immediate shock. What was meant to be a controlled administrative adjustment becomes a silent power rupture that no one in the palace expected to surface so suddenly or so definitively. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew every person in that room understood the weight of what was coming. Nothing about Sandringham had ever been simple. The estate had always carried more than history. It carried control, influence, and the quiet balance between competing royal households. Sandringham itself, a vast royal estate in Norfolk, traditionally used for private family gatherings and seasonal retreats, had long functioned as a shared operational space where multiple senior advisors indirectly shaped decisions without ever fully owning them. Camilla's aides felt the shift first, even before the official confirmation landed. One of her closest advisors froze as the internal briefing reached their desk, eyes scanning the lines again and again, as if repetition might change the meaning. It didn't. The exclusion was absolute. No consultation, no prior signal, no softened warning, just removal. Across another corridor, William received the same document in silence. He did not react, did not speak. He simply lowered his gaze, then set the paper down with deliberate calm, understanding instantly that this was not administrative. It was historical. Charles had not reached this point lightly. Pressure had been building for months to streamline estate authority ahead of succession planning being the formal process of preparing how responsibilities and assets transfer from one monarch to the next. Every review had pointed towards simplification, but no one expected it to arrive this sharply. The confirmation bypassed expected advisory steps entirely, cutting through layers of consultation that normally softened such decisions into gradual transitions. Inside palace operations, confusion spread fast. A private notice circulated through restricted channels, confirming that Sandringham decision pathways had been redirected exclusively to William's office. One senior clerk reread the instruction twice before realizing it wasn't a draft, it was final. At the same time, Camilla's inner circle struggled to maintain composure as access credentials quietly shifted, cutting them out of systems they had used for years. And then came the whisper. A senior courtier, speaking only in a half-closed doorway, suggested the decision did not begin with Sandringham at all. It began elsewhere, tied to an incident no one was permitted to reference openly. The words were brief, but they landed heavily, because everyone understood what it meant inside a palace. When something is not allowed to be discussed, it usually means it changed everything. Inside a quiet private chamber, Charles reads the final confirmation sheet, pauses for several seconds, and slowly places it face down on the table, before saying nothing at tapped. All while across the corridor, Camilla's aide receives the same notice and visibly loses composure. But the question no one inside the palace dares to answer is why this decision was made now and who triggered it in the first place. Long before the confirmation reached Sandringham, something irreversible had already taken place behind closed doors, a private exchange that quietly redrew the lines of authority without a single public announcement. What appeared to be a routine royal briefing in reality became the precise moment when the chain of control shifted, setting in motion the decision that would later be formalized as William's sole authority. Charles knew every person in that restricted room understood the weight of what was unfolding. The meeting had been called under the official banner of Estate Efficiency Protocols, Internal Reviews meant to streamline how royal properties were managed and reduce overlapping oversight. But beneath that calm wording sat something far more decisive. Sandringham was not just land or tradition. It was influence, access, and quiet control woven through generations of royal governance. William sat still as the discussion deepened, He could feel the direction of the conversation shifting before anyone said it aloud. The future king understood what was being implied, even when it was never fully stated. His elevation inside the room was not ceremonial, it was structural. Each reference to future singular authority assignment pointed toward him, tightening the space around his role until it could no longer be shared. Camilla did not move much during the meeting, but she felt every shift. The language changed first, then the tone, then the direction of decisions. What had started as shared advisory discussions slowly narrowed into inheritance-aligned, management structures meaning authority, tied directly to the line of succession rather than shared consultation between households. That shift left her influence quietly slipping outside the frame of the conversation, even while she remained in the room. Charles waited until the sealed document was placed in front of him. It referenced Sandringham directly, outlining the possibility of a future singular authority assignment. He did not react immediately. Instead, he paused mid-discussion earlier, when the briefing turned toward estate, distribution balance, breaking the flow of the room without warning. That silence forced everyone to stop speaking, forcing the decision-making process into his hands alone. The atmosphere tightened further when a confidential briefing interruption arrived. A disputed estate compliance file flagged inconsistencies in how shared oversight had been recorded across Sandringham operations. It was not dramatic in presentation, just a thin folder handed in quietly, but its contents were enough to fracture the logic of the ongoing discussion. Charles received it without comment, scanned one page, and closed it immediately. No one spoke after that. The room waited for clarification that never came. Instead, Charles set the folder down and made a single decision that changed everything. Sandringham would no longer be treated under shared advisory oversight. The words were calm, almost controlled, but they carried irreversible weight. William's expression tightened slightly. Camilla's gaze shifted, realizing the structure she had been part of was already being rewritten in real time. That single interruption becomes the point of no return, reshaping every relationship inside the palace. Silence broke first inside the palace corridors, not with noise, but with circulation's slow, unstoppable movement of a confirmation that could no longer be contained. William and Camilla were about to meet, but the tension had already arrived before they did. What was meant to remain controlled had already spread through senior offices, and now every glance, every pause, every closed door carried the same meaning. Something irreversible had been signed into place. William knew every step toward the meeting room felt heavier than the last. The future king understood the weight of sole authority over Sandringham, not just as a title shift, but as a structural transfer of responsibility. Sandringham, the royal estate in Norfolk, long managed through shared oversight between senior royal households, had now been placed entirely under his control. That meant every decision, every channel of access, every advisory route, now bent toward one office alone. He entered the space composed, but that composure carried strain, like something carefully held together under pressure. Camilla arrived already aware the ground beneath her had changed. Her advisory team had been demanding clarity for hours, pressing for explanation after discovering they had been excluded from the oversight chain without warning. Camilla, the queen consort and senior partner in royal advisory functions, felt that exclusion not as a technical adjustment, but as a personal rupture in trust. She had built influence through years of steady involvement, and now she was staring at a structure where that involvement no longer existed. William did not speak immediately when he entered. He did not need to. The silence between them already carried the confirmation everyone had been reading in fragments. Camilla held her composure, but only just. Her control over expression tightened as she realized the most important truth of all: she had not been part of the final decision chain. No consultation, no prior alignment, only outcome. Camilla finally broke the silence, her voice controlled but sharp beneath it. Her question was direct, stripped of ceremony, aimed at the core of the issue: why her office had been excluded from Sandringham oversight entirely. The question hung in the room longer than expected. William paused, not in hesitation, but in wait. Then he answered quietly, that he did not choose exclusion. He added something heavier, slower, that he could not reverse what had already been sealed. The words landed without defense, without softness, only finality. No official explanation followed, only reference to direct royal instruction, a phrase that carried authority but no detail, no reasoning, no pathway backward. That absence became its own pressure. It revealed something deeper than disagreement. It exposed a procedural breakdown where expected consultation layers had simply not been used. Decisions of this scale were never meant to bypass advisory structure so completely, yet here it had happened without resistance, without correction. Camilla's expression tightened as the realization set in. This was not just exclusion, it was redefinition. William remained still, carrying the burden of a decision that he did not publicly claim, but could no longer detach from. The air between them shifted from confrontation to something more fragile: understanding. Without agreement, authority without shared language. And then the room changed again. A quiet update arrived through internal channels, suggesting Charles was preparing to intervene personally, stepping into the situation at the highest level of authority. That single detail reframed everything. This was no longer a closed disagreement. It was escalation. And in that silence, the real architecture of power inside the monarchy begins to reveal itself. Camilla did not speak when the second confirmation reached the inner offices. William did not move when the same truth reached him again through a separate channel. Silence inside the palace was no longer absence of sound. It was pressure building behind closed doors, waiting for the one person who could still define its direction. Every corridor seemed to lean toward the same question without ever saying it out loud. Who actually controlled Sandringham now? Beyond the paperwork, beyond the protocol, beyond the visible chain of command. Charles knew every rule in the system had a single exception written into it. The monarch held constitutional authority over royal estate assignments, meaning the king retained final legal discretion to decide how major royal properties like Sandringham were governed. That authority did not require consultation. It did not require agreement. It only required decision. And now that decision had already been made public through consequence, not announcement. William felt it before he fully named it in his mind. The future king understood that what looked like consolidation was actually acceleration. Sandringham had been under quiet review for months, part of a wider restructuring aimed at streamlining estate governance ahead of generational transition. Streamlining meant reducing overlapping oversight so decisions moved faster, cleaner, without friction between households. But speed always carried weight, and now that weight was landing directly on him. Camilla felt something different, but just as sharp. Her exclusion was not just operational, it was symbolic. Years of advisory presence had placed her inside decision spaces that now seemed to close. Without her, the queen consort had never needed formal ownership to shape outcomes. But now, even informal influence was thinning at the edges. What unsettled her most was not loss of control, it was the absence of explanation for that loss. Charles sat alone with a second file opened in front of him. Internal advisors had begun quietly questioning whether the Sandringham decision was reactive or the result of long-term planning. No one dared state it directly in his presence, but the question lingered in reports, in hesitation, in carefully chosen words. William's name appeared more frequently in strategic summaries, not as a surprise, but as an inevitability that seemed to arrive faster than expected. Camilla's absence from the final advisory loop created a fracture that others could feel but not formally describe. The balance between senior counsel had always depended on subtle inclusion. Now that structure had shifted, and even loyal advisors struggled to understand whether they were witnessing correction or realignment. Every assumption about shared influence suddenly looked unstable. Charles tapped the edge of the second file once. Just once. No expression followed, no reaction invited, no discussion opened. Then he slid it into a secure drawer and closed it without calling anyone, without requesting clarification, without offering explanation. That silence carried more authority than any announcement ever could, because in that moment, Decisions were no longer being explained upward or outward, they were being sealed at the source. But what triggered that sealed response still lies buried beneath layers of palace silence. Camilla did not speak as the first wave of internal confirmations tore through the palace system. William did not react outwardly as the same shift reached his office. Within hours, the silence of control turned into movement fast, irreversible, and deeply unsettling. What had been framed as a single decision was now breaking apart into consequences no one fully understood yet. Within hours of the confirmation spreading through internal channels, the palace begins to fracture in subtle but unmistakable ways. Sandringham-related administrative access is immediately redirected to William's private office structure, meaning every request, approval, and oversight function tied to the estate now flows through one central authority. Sandringham, the royal estate in Norfolk, historically used as both a private residence and seasonal working hub for the royal family, suddenly stops behaving like a shared space and starts operating like a single command system. Camilla's senior aide felt it first. A revision sheet landed on their desk, formally titled Internal Reporting Realignment, a document that simply meant staff were now being reassigned into new command lines without any transition period. Reporting lines, the structure that determines who answers to whom inside royal operations, had been redrawn overnight. The aides stared at it longer than they should have, rereading each line as if repetition might soften the impact. It didn't. Something stable had been removed without warning. Camilla herself remained composed in front of others, but the reaction inside her circle was immediate. One of her closest advisors finally broke silence in a private recorded briefing meant for internal documentation, describing the moment as complete structural erasure of oversight. The phrase spread quickly through trusted channels, not as rumor, but as recorded sentiment. For Camilla, the shock was not only professional, it was personal. Authority she had once shared in practice was now absent in writing. William, meanwhile, reviewed the updated structure in silence. The future king saw not just the change, but the speed of it. He did not celebrate it. He studied it. The revised hierarchy placed full Sandringham authority under his office without transitional buffer, something that even experienced court advisors described as unusually direct. His concern was not the power itself, but the lack of gradual handover that normally protected institutional stability. Confusion spread as internal departments tried to interpret boundaries that were no longer clearly defined. One group believed Sandringham authority meant full operational control, while another insisted it was limited to administrative oversight only. That contradiction created tension inside the system itself. When rules are unclear at the top, every layer beneath begins to interpret power differently, and interpretation quickly becomes conflict. A second-level advisory group, usually far removed from high-level decisions, began quietly asking whether this was isolated or part of a broader pattern. If Sandringham could shift so completely, what about other estates tied to senior royal management? The question spread without needing to be spoken loudly. It only needed to be considered once for uncertainty to take root. Then the message arrived. A quiet internal note circulated through restricted channels, suggesting that Charles may address the situation personally within hours. No confirmation, no schedule, just a suggestion that the monarch himself might step into the aftermath directly. The possibility alone changed the atmosphere again, tightening it further, as if the entire palace was now waiting for a voice that had not yet spoken. A palace administrator froze mid-task after reading the updated directive. Their hands hovered over the paper for a moment too long. Then slowly, without saying a word, they placed the document down and stepped back, refusing to acknowledge anyone in the room. No explanation followed. None was needed. And as tension builds internally, a private meeting is quietly arranged that will change everything again. The corridor outside felt louder than the room itself. Every step toward the closed door carried weight that no official briefing had prepared for. Inside, nothing moved yet, but everything had already changed. No aides waited outside. No advisors stood ready. Only silence guarded what was about to be decided between two men who understood that this moment would not stay private for long. Camilla did not enter the room. She remained outside the immediate exchange, and that absence spoke louder than presence ever could. The queen consort had already felt the shift earlier in the day, how discussions had narrowed, how authority had tightened around direct succession alignment, meaning decisions structured explicitly around the line of future monarchy transition rather than shared, advisory tradition. And now she stood just beyond reach, excluded not by confrontation, but by structure. Charles knew why this meeting had to be alone. The king, the monarch holding constitutional authority over royal estate assignments, understood that some decisions collapse under too many voices. Sandringham had already become more than an estate. It had become a test of how the monarchy would function when speed replaced consensus. And now the only remaining question was whether William was ready to carry it without division. William felt it the moment he stepped inside. No titles were needed here, no ceremony, just responsibility. The future king understood what sole authority meant, not just control, but isolation. Sandringham, the royal estate long used as both private residence and operational hub for the monarchy, now sat entirely under his name in function, not symbolism. That weight pressed down quietly, harder than any public expectation ever could. Charles did not speak immediately. He watched his son carefully, not as an heir, but as a decision-maker, stepping into structural permanence. The king had been carrying consolidation of estate direction for months, slowly tightening governance to ensure that future transitions would not fracture under shared authority. What looked like speed to others felt, to him, like delayed necessity finally catching up. William finally broke the silence, not with resistance but recognition. He acknowledged the emotional responsibility without dressing it in formality. The authority was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it would now sit entirely with him. The responsibility was heavier than procedure, heavier than approval. It was permanence. And for a moment, even his voice carried that realization. Charles responded with something quieter. Not instruction, not defense, just finality. There was a stillness in him that came from knowing the structure had already shifted beyond return. The king expressed no regret, only acceptance that certain decisions redefine the system rather than adjust it. And in that acceptance, the emotional distance between duty and family became painfully clear. Camilla remained outside, unaware of the exact words, but aware of the silence itself. That silence hinted at something larger, forming beyond Sandringham, something structural, something that would not stop at one estate. The discussion inside did not stay contained to one authority. It expanded outward, touching the edges of future governance, without ever naming it directly. Then it happened without announcement. A decision was made, not as a suggestion, but as direction. The conversation shifted from internal alignment to external inevitability. What was agreed inside this room would not remain private for long. It would move outward, toward confirmation that no longer required approval, only acknowledgement. William nodded slowly, not in agreement alone, but in acceptance of what could not be softened. He looked away for a moment, not from doubt, but from weight, then returned his gaze forward. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. He confirmed it simply, that he would assume full responsibility, without delegation, without shared advisory return, without reversal. Charles did not repeat it. He did not need to. The silence that followed carried more authority than any formal statement could. And that private alignment is about to break into the public world in a way no one can contain. The confirmation did not stay inside palace walls for long. It spread fast, too fast to contain, too structured to ignore. Within hours, what began as an internal adjustment became a public event with global weight. Sandringham was no longer just an estate. It had become a symbol, and symbols, once exposed, never return quietly to the shadows. William knew the moment it broke into the media cycle that control had shifted again. The prince, the future king, was no longer just part of a structural change. He was now the center of it. Major outlets carried the confirmation with stark precision. emphasizing his sole authority over Sandringham as fact, not interpretation. Sandringham, the royal estate in Norfolk long associated with private royal residence and seasonal governance, was now framed publicly as a single command domain. That framing changed everything. It turned internal structure into public perception. Charles did not intervene immediately. The monarch understood that once information entered public space, it gained a life of its own. Analysts across television networks and press columns began dissecting the move within minutes, calling it a defining shift in royal operational structure. Not a routine adjustment, not a minor reshuffle, a structural realignment of how authority flowed through the monarchy itself. Camilla felt the attention turned toward her in a way that had nothing to do with official statements. The queen consort became a focal point not through action, but through absence. Commentary did not accuse her directly, but it questioned her positioning, her advisory proximity, her sudden exclusion from Sandringham oversight. In a recorded panel discussion later broadcast on a national news channel, one analyst described the situation as a visible narrowing of influence inside the royal circle, a phrase that quickly spread beyond the studio and into public debate. William watched the coverage without emotion showing on his face, but the weight of exposure was unmistakable. What had been carefully structured inside closed rooms was now being interpreted in real time by millions. Every sentence broadcast about him carried consequences beyond intent. Authority, once internal, was now performative in the public eye. Then the reaction intensified. A BBC broadcast paused mid-segment during a live discussion and replayed the confirmation announcement twice after viewers flooded the channel with requests for clarity. The interruption itself became part of the story. Not just what was said, but how urgently it needed to be heard again. At the same time, a national newspaper pushed a front-page headline in bold letters: Sandringham under one crown hand. The phrasing stripped complexity into permanence. One line, one interpretation, no room left for ambiguity. Camilla's name continued to surface in commentary circles, not as a decision-maker, but as a figure suddenly positioned outside the central axis of influence. That shift in perception was more powerful than any official statement, because in public narratives, perception becomes structure faster than policy does. Outside a royal residence, the reaction turned physical. A small crowd gathered as a reporter read the confirmation live on air. The words echoed through phones, cameras, and murmurs of disbelief. Some questioned the speed of the change. Others debated whether this marked modernization or consolidation of power. Voices overlapped. Opinions collided. And in that moment, the monarchy stopped being distant and became immediate. William's role, Camilla's positioning, Charles' authority, all of it now existed in public discussion at once. Stripped of internal pacing, the world was no longer observing a decision. It was reacting to a shift it could not reverse. And while the world reacts loudly, the monarchy itself prepares for the final emotional reckoning. Camilla did not speak when the final confirmation settled across the palace systems. William did not celebrate when the acknowledgement reached his office. And Charles did not explain when the last layer of approval silently closed. What began as a sealed decision inside palace walls had now hardened into something irreversible, something that no longer needed permission to exist. Charles knew every consequence had already begun moving faster than words could contain. Sandringham, the royal estate in Norfolk, long associated with shared royal oversight and seasonal governance, now sat entirely under William's singular operational authority. No shared advisory structure remained. No overlapping influence survived the transition. What replaced it was clarity, but clarity that came at a cost. The king understood that the monarchy's internal governance model had shifted towards streamlined generational control, meaning authority now flowed directly through succession lines rather than distributed counsel. Camilla's absence from that structure was no longer temporary or procedural. It had become permanent by design, not by conflict. The queen consort felt it in the silence around her, more than in any official document. Internal systems had already finalized updated authority hierarchies, quietly removing her advisory pathways from Sandringham operations without further discussion. What remained was not confrontation, but distance that could not be reversed by explanation. William stood alone with the weight of what had been placed in his hands. The future king did not see triumph in it. He saw permanence, responsibility without retreat. Sandringham under his authority meant every decision now carried finality, every outcome tied directly to him, without shared buffer or delegation. He accepted it not with relief, but with visible seriousness, and understanding that the role was no longer something he approached, but something he now carried completely. Charles sat alone, with the completed confirmation file in front of him. No aides entered. No follow-up was requested. The monarch reviewed the document once more, not for correction, but for closure. His hand rested briefly on the edge of the paper before he closed the folder slowly and left it untouched. That stillness carried more meaning than any public statement ever could. It marked legacy consolidation, an act where authority is gathered into fewer hands to ensure continuity, even when it demands emotional sacrifice. Camilla's exclusion, once questioned as sudden, now existed as structure itself. It was no longer an event, it was architecture. A fixed point inside the monarchies, new alignment that could not be undone without reshaping everything around it. The system had accepted it, and in doing so, made it permanent. Inside palace operations, the final adjustments were completed without ceremony. Reporting lines were updated, estate management hierarchies locked into place, and Sandringham fully integrated under William's singular authority. No confusion remained in the system, now only order. A new operational era had been written into the monarchy's internal framework, one that no longer relied on shared interpretation, but direct succession control. Charles reflected in silence on what had been set in motion. There was no doubt in his mind that the decision was necessary, but necessity did not remove its weight. It only made it harder to carry. William, on the other side of that same decision, understood it fully now, not as inheritance, but as permanence, not as privilege, but as responsibility that could not be returned. And in that final understanding, everything aligned into a single reality. The monarchy had crossed its threshold. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. This moment is ultimately defined as a controlled but profound transition of power. It strengthens continuity under William while closing a chapter of shared influence around Sandringham. The monarchy emerges more centralized, more structured, and undeniably reshaped, leaving behind tension, but also a clear direction forward. The decision stands, the system has changed, and there is no return to what existed before. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.